This time I thought we'd try a little something different. And no, I'm not restarting close to home. Figured we'd do a little testing with some rovers. See, I was struck when I first drove this thing and when I was watching some of the other videos, how well this little salvage truck actually did. And the creator, Wellington 6012, he made this as just a prop for another video series he did, another scenario in another video series, Far From Home. This is only supposed to be on screen for a minute or two, and then that was it. He reused it in this one because it is tied, it's the same storyline he tied to it. And now that there's been a few people that have played it and ran around in the scenario, they found out that it actually doesn't do that bad. So I thought I'd put it up against a few other things. This first one, this is one of my creations. I made this for something I was doing on Pertam, drifting. I did this for Pertam, where I had assertive combat system turned on. The magnesium was quite a ways away, and there's a bunch of bases that popped up between me and them, so I needed something to go get magnesium with in a bit safer, well, at least get back in one piece manner. So I made this, and it ended up actually doing pretty decent driving wise. It is definitely back heavy, which can cause problems, especially if you have a load, but otherwise it doesn't do too bad. We get more behind me here. And this here on the end, this is a more classic Space Engineers Rover. This is something I think Keen Software House made or whatever, but you'll see this on the menu page pop up sometimes. You'll see it around maybe one or two of the scenarios. But I threw this in here as just something a bit more familiar. And we're going to put these three through kind of the same test where they've got to get down to the ice lake down there. Then I might cook something else up. Let's see how long this video ends up being. But I think this would be interesting test to see how these three do against each other, and mainly see how the little salvage truck over here holds up to some competition. Now the first thing I'm going to do, select all those. And I'm going to use the same height offset, speed limit, and power for all of them. And let's see, friction. Beyond that, I'm going to leave the rest of it alone. I'm going to leave the steering angle, what wheels steer and don't steer, and how much alone, the suspension strength. I'm going to leave all that alone. So, let's see how this thing does. Now, most people that run the scenario end up losing the crane and the dump bed fairly quickly. But I thought I'd drive it. Oof, there's one tree. Thought I'd drive it as is. The early part of the scenario, for those who haven't played it, there's a fair amount of driving over some pretty rough terrain. You're not given much of anything to start. Basically, this truck, that house, is really not supposed to be salvaged, though some people have. A little bit of salvage, at least. But this trip to the ice lake is just kind of a warm-up lap, really, compared to what the rest of it has to do. And we can see with a somewhat pre-planned path, you can get down fairly easy. It handles that somewhat rough terrain, though that's not that rough compared to what some of the other you have to go over. It does that fairly decent. Get out here to this message bot, we'll go back to the other ones. And I do have creative mode turned on, so I've gotten vulnerability. Hold on. Yeah, I've gotten vulnerability and creative mode tools turned on still. The turning radius on this thing's not that great. That's probably a good thing. It kind of helps. It reduces the chance, though it does not eliminate, of it rolling over. Though out here on the ice lake, you're really not going to notice. I forgot to mark that spot up there. So that's the first part of that and how that handles going down. I'll find my way back up to the homestead with the others. We'll drive the other one down here, see how it does. We're back at the top. And just to make things a bit more even, 60, friction 50. Speed 100. Now this has different wheels, so the height offset's going to look a little different. But essentially, they're all the way down. See if I can get out of here without taking out the other rover. Well, it looks like ground clearance may be a problem. Well, looks like this thing has ground clearance problems. It keeps banging into the ground, keeping it from rolling. It normally is not that bad. It actually does pretty decent. but just does not seem to like this terrain. Going to go back up. I'm going to increase the suspension strength and give that another try, see if that helps. Well, we're back at the top. I've messed with the suspension strength a little bit. I've increased it. It was 6, now 10%. Let's see. We have the same kind of problems. Looks like it's acting a lot better. Hope someone else is keeping track of the trees because I've lost count. Well, once we got the suspension sorted out, it did a lot better. And this thing's reasonably nimble. It's a fair amount heavier than what the little salvage truck is. This is that front end and all the top end, that's all heavy armor, not to mention the weapons. So despite its bad balance and maybe some ground clearance issues, it doesn't do too bad, really. I'll get this over to the message satellite here. I'll go back up for the rover, our last rover. Right, we're back up. And just like the others, and take all the wheels. Now this one, they've got the power turned down on, so put it back up to be equal with others. Same with suspension being all the way down. And the same speed limit. No other changes than that. Let's see how this does. Now that little thing turns quick. Hold it. Going the wrong direction. Well, this little thing seems pretty agile. It turns pretty quick. Well, maybe not out here on the ice, but Turns fairly quick. Seems stable. It's really not that bad a little design. Get this over here to the message bot also, and I'll go see what the video length looks like. Maybe I'll throw in another test, maybe not, we'll see. Well, it does look like we've got time for one more, or at least one more. While the last challenge was getting downhill, this one's getting back up and out. And this is the same world, you know, the message bot's over there, the homestead's back over there. Getting up out of this area is probably the first major challenge is getting down to the lake. But then getting up out of here is also quite the challenge, as that's a fairly decent hill. Now I've laid out some markers here to show a path that I'm going to use to get up there, because a major part of this early on is navigating, finding a way just to get from point A to point B. So we're going to start again with the one the scenario starts with. Now by this time, I had already gotten rid of the dump bed. I think I already may have mentioned that, but the crane and dump bed were already gone. So I haven't driven this exactly up through here. Quite the hole. That didn't sound good. Well, I had gotten out of here with this. Perhaps a bit more careful driving would have done me some more good. I'll go back, I'll spawn this back in, and I'll give it another shot. Well, here we go for try number 2. Oh, wait. Haven't changed anything. Okay, now we're going. I think I'll curve around this a little different. And this here is a pretty narrow path for, so something that's wider might have some issues getting up through there. Well, with careful route planning, we can see that it does indeed make it up there. It does not like the rougher terrain, as we saw. My jetpack just broke it in half. But it's thin enough and carries enough momentum it can get over some stuff, and that does help it out. I'll go back down and we'll get the next one up here, see how it does. Well, we're back down there. Going to use this. This is quite a bit wider than the others, so it might have a bit of a problem getting through some of those spots. But we will see. It's also a fair amount heavier, so climbing up these hills may not be as easy. I haven't tried the rougher stuff. It seems to be high-centered on that.
Fuel critical.
Well, it appears it didn't do any better than the salvage truck going up the rougher section. So we'll have another go with it. Well, here we go for try number 2. And this is where I think this one will have real problems.
Fuel critical.
Well, it didn't make it on the second try. I thought the width of it might be a bit of a problem in those narrow spots, but it did make it through there. And it did not, despite the bigger wheels, didn't do any better on the harder, rougher terrain. I'll go back for that last rover, and I don't think I'm going to try the rough terrain with it, because I don't think it's going to stand a chance on that. And now we've got the last one. That sounded like hard parts were hitting. Shadows making it hard to see. Shadow and a little light fog.
Fuel critical.
Well, all three of these were able to make it through course. I will say this thing is pretty agile. And I don't know if they've got more than one gyro on this. It's only showing one gyro. But that one gyro really moves this thing around. Where I know I didn't mess with the gyro on this. It's at 50%, if I remember right. Yeah, its power is at 50%.
Fuel critical.
It really helps out on this thing having that, because you can make adjustments mid-air fairly easy. That thing's still capable of it. But being a bit bigger, I don't know if you'd want to. I know this thing has two gyros on it. They're stuck up underneath there on each side. And that is enough that it can make adjustments mid-air. And it doesn't seem to do quite as well in this stuff as these other two. But it's also a lot bigger and I think a fair amount heavier. Let's see, grid mass, let's call that 3430. Less than half.
Fuel critical.
Even lighter.
Fuel critical.
So, despite its being twice as heavy as the others, this thing was able to go through the rest of it. So that's not too bad, I guess, really. And this thing isn't real heavy, but it's not necessarily as light as this thing over here. And it does pretty good. Like I said earlier, I think he wasn't intending for it to be used as much as it has ended up being used. But it's ended up being pretty good for that. The only thing is these front wheels are the only thing that turns. And I think they're at the standard 20%. Yeah, 20%.
Fuel critical.
So the turning radius on this thing isn't all that great. It is somewhat long. And with only those front wheels turning, it makes a difference. Overall, he has, like I said, he's done fairly well with that. Thanks for watching.